I wanted to have a discussion about what's happening in the Gaza Strip area. Fighting started, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, early in July. In fact, July the 8th is a date which has been bandied by many. However, fighting has obviously been going on there for many, many years. The Palestinian death toll, according to some reports at the moment, is of 523. Israel say about 18 of its soldiers have also died, along with 2 civilians as well. It is just an area from an outsider looking in, one wonders how is it ever going to be solved there. I was keen to catch up with the Director of Jewish Studies at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Dvir Abramovich, and Dvir joins us. Good morning, Dvir.
Good morning, Glenn. Glad to be here.
It is an area and a discussion. There's been conflict there for many, many, many years now, Dvir. Is there any future, any sign of peace being to that part of the world, do you think?
I think anybody who's been watching the spiraling conflict between Israel and Hamas realizes that it's an unfortunately regular pattern, and it breaks your heart, when there's a war, and the escalating crisis and the loss of life is very, very sad. But I think there's a clear understanding now amongst the international community that Hamas is to blame, and that Israel absolutely has a right to defend itself, a legitimate and absolute right to defend itself and to defend its citizens. And it's interesting to note that the international community, whether it is Germany or whether it is the U.S., has backed Israel's right and has criticized Hamas for continuing to fire rocket attacks. We have to remember that over the last 10 years, more than 12,000 rockets have hit Israeli cities, the civilian population, and now it's actually reaching into Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And I think what's even more staggering, Glenn, is that the Arab world, there's growing criticism among the Arab world of the Hamas strategy. I'll just mention that Egypt's foreign minister, Sameh Shoukry, who actually was trying to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, has blamed Hamas for the ongoing bloodshed, saying that Hamas could have saved many lives that were lost unnecessarily had they agreed to the truce that Egypt had proposed. And it's even more remarkable that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has accused Hamas of provoking needless casualties. And if you read his own words, he said, they're trading in Palestinian blood. So I think that...
Why, just on that, Dvir, sorry to butt in there, from a very much an outsider point of view of someone sitting here in Melbourne like I am, why are the Palestinians and why are the people of that area allowing Hamas to do this if this is the situation? This is what I can't get my head around.
Well, that's probably, the key question, and I appreciate that, because when we have to remember that Israel ended its occupation of Gaza in 2005, it evacuated every single settlement and every single Israeli settler was taken out of Gaza. And, greenhouses were left behind, farm equipment, and, material which, could have fed the population. And I know from reports that there were many countries who promised support, both financial and political, to the Palestinian people in Gaza. And some people were talking about Gaza as a Singapore on the Mediterranean. But instead, what happened, instead of nation building, we had rocket launching. And unfortunately, the Palestinian people in Gaza made a huge mistake by voting for Hamas in the elections. Hamas came into power without any planners or architects or any kind of plan for the future. And the message that was sent to the world was, we're not ready for statehood, we're not interested in peace. We have to remember that Hamas is outlawed by the majority of countries as a terrorist organization. And they have what's called a human shield strategy, where they use civilians as shields against the rockets against the Israeli army coming in. And I just read an interesting interview with Colonel Richard Kemp, who's a former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan, and one of the most highly decorated and respected officers. And he said that from what he has seen, the Israeli Defense Forces are not using unnecessary force and are taking every possible precaution to minimize civilian casualties. It is a shame. I think the only way forward for any kind of peace in that region is for the Palestinian people to overthrow the Hamas regime. And
Dvir, and again, I apologise for butting in. Israel obviously have the ability to shoot down the bombs which are being fired by the Hamas, and all reports are that Hamas started throwing the bombs. Why can Israel not, for the sake of peace and maybe some discussions happening, keep shooting down the bombs coming towards them but not retaliate? It just seems each side is intent on throwing bombs at each other. Israel, obviously, and I'm not anti-Israel, please don't take it this way, but they have the capabilities of stopping the bombs going through to Israel. Would that not then put the world very much on their side to say, listen, the bombs are still coming, we're not firing them, Hamas are to blame, and really get international community, on their side?
I think the international community understands that there's a moral clarity here. And just imagine, Glenn, that rockets, 10,000, 12,000 rockets were landing in Melbourne. Would the Australian government say to its citizens, we are not going to exercise our right of self-defense. We are not going to defend you. We are simply going to try and shoot down. And let's face it, not every rocket that is fired from Gaza is shot down by the Iron Dome system. So, it is imperative, it is the responsibility of every government, of every prime minister to protect its people. And by the way, it's not just the rockets that are landing. The more Israelis see what is happening, it's becoming clear that there's an extensive network of tunnels through which Hamas terrorists are infiltrating Israel.
I read about that. That's
and the aim is very clear. It's to murder civilians, it's to kidnap civilians, and Israel has a responsibility to defend its people. So, unfortunately, we're in a situation now where unless Hamas agrees to a ceasefire, but I think more significantly, unless the Palestinian people say in a very clear way that the present Hamas leadership is unacceptable. And I don't know if you remember, but Golda Meir, who was Israel's prime minister in the 60s and in the early 70s, she said that the peace would come, and I quote, when Palestinians love their children more than they hate Israel. And I would say that most Palestinians love their children. And maybe they hate Israel because they've been taught to do so for generations. But more and more of them are coming to realize that, the real enemy is not Israel, which has left the Gaza Strip and has offered to leave the West Bank in 2001 and in 2008. The real enemies of the Palestinians are those Hamas leaders who love their children less. And that is, I think, the equation that we have to think about.
Certainly using human shield is something that the world should condemn. Dvir, look, thank you very much for that. It's just one of those situations where it's good to hear different points of view from that point of it. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, and we pray for peace. Thanks.